Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a rundown over Section 4. Hopefully, this helps to clear up any doubts or misunderstandings from what you read. So, we're talking about the legislative and judicial powers of the president. And the first power of legislation is a very simple one, just the fact that he has the power to address Congress all at once with special messages. That includes the State of the Union, but also um, there are two other very important ones in the year where he gives them a message on the government spending and the economy. And the power of these messages kind of depends on the president, right? The power of the president. How much his party has strength in Congress and how much the people support him, right? If the people don't support a president, then the Congress won't feel obliged to listen to them. But the fact that the president is the only nationally elected representative means that he carries some popular support with him naturally. So let's give an example of one of these messages. One of the first ones was from George Washington, where he asks Congress to pass a law for a standing army, stating that providing for the common defense will merit particular regard. To be prepared for war is one of the most effectual means of preserving peace. And he was asking Congress to keep a permanent army, where in contrast would be not having an army and only calling upon volunteers in times of crisis. So he was asking for Congress to pass bills that would just keep permanent professional soldiers. He also asked for things like immigration laws, defining citizenship, and setting a national currency. And these laws were passed by Congress covering these topics. So it's debatable how impactful his messages were. Now we move on and we talk about the veto power. And here in the checkpoint, it asks what options are available to a president when presented with a bill. So there are 4 options. Get ready to write this down. One is just signing the bill, which agrees with the law and makes it official. Another is the veto, which we are going to talk about now, which means that they deny the law and they send it back to Congress. And then Congress needs 2/3 from both houses to override the president's veto if they want it to continue to become law. Third is not signing the law, which hardly ever happens, where he just lets the bill become law after 10 days, and you guys already know that. And the fourth one is the pocket veto, where if Congress adjourns before he signs the law, it also does not become a law. And the bill basically dies and has to start from the beginning if it ever wants to become a law again. So, what do you think about this power? Do you think it's too much? Do you think it is too little? If you go to the Congress's website, they actually state that since 1969, Congress has been overriding about 1/5 of all vetoes. So 20% of all laws that are vetoed by the president are overturned by getting 2/3 majority. So let's give an example of some laws that have been vetoed. Let's go back to one of the first. George Washington vetoed the First Apportionment Act of 1792. And basically, this law was when Congress was just getting started and they needed to make a law to apportion representatives, or meaning how many representatives would each state get in the House. Remember that the House gets representative based on their population. And they came up with this rule that every 30,000 people would get one representative, and the 8 states with the largest populations would get an extra representative. And of course, under Thomas Jefferson actually saw this, and he was the advisor to the president. He says, he told George Washington to veto the law, saying not to play favorites and not wanting to give the larger states even more influence in the House than they would already have. On the other hand, the 2 presidents that followed George Washington didn't veto anything. 2 of the presidents who had the most vetoes are President Gerald Ford, having 2 terms. In his 2 terms, he vetoed 584 bills, which is only beaten by FDR, but you could say that is because FDR is the only president to have more than 2 terms. He actually was president for more than 3 terms, more than 12 years. And FDR vetoed 635 bills. And there are people that think that he vetoed too many, that he should not have vetoed all those bills. But let's look at one of the examples of a law that he vetoed. One law that he vetoed was where Congress tried to pass pensions for World War I veterans, which sounds like a very great thing, but he thought that it was too much money, saying that a sum equal to 3/4 of the entire cost of the American participation in World War I or something of the like. So he thought that the Congress had given too much money to the veterans, almost doubling the cost of the war. So now let's move on to signing statements. This is kind of what presidents have more recently been doing, especially with George W. Bush. Has made signing statements very, very popular. And then Obama said that he would do that less, right? So a signing statement is when the president chooses that first option, signing a bill, making it law, but also he kind of sends a message, writes a message at the end of the bill, right, to say why he is signing it. And a lot of times it starts with like, oh, this law is so great, it's going to help so many people. But the controversy is that it also may have some comments of the way that the executive branch is going to execute it, right? And this can influence the courts in how they interpret the law. If perhaps a lawyer cites the signing statement of a bill, but that's beyond the scope of this. Let's look at one signing statement from George W. Bush, where he signed the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2005. And his signing statement starts out with, this is so great, it's going to provide protection for those who are victims of this horrible crime. But then within the signing statement, he says that Article 104 or something like that says that the Secretary of State needs to submit a report to Congress prior to voting for any new peacekeeping missions. And of course, the president said in his signing statement, the executive shall construe this reporting requirement in a manner consistent with the president's constitutional authority. Kind of saying that they are going to give them reports as they see fit. And he may be citing constitutional authority. He may be citing the constitutional principle of separation of powers, that the president does not have to answer to Congress under this type of government. So it's kind of strange, rather than, and that may be because he didn't want to veto a law that provides protection for trafficking victims, but he also just didn't like that one line in the bill that would require them to send reports to Congress every time. And this is very common, and this is actually why we move on to next, the line item veto, which is because the president has to either sign the bill into law or try to not make sure the law does not get passed at all, right? So it's an all or nothing kind of power with them. And a lot of times maybe there are really good laws that are passed, but maybe there are some things within them that the president doesn't agree with. Like here it says that maybe a line item veto power should be included, where the president can just veto amounts of money that the government tries to spend for a bill, and as a way to kind of control government spending. However, the president does not have that power. He has to veto the entire bill or agree with the entire bill. So it's up to you to think, should he have a line item veto where he gets to sort of pick parts of the law that he thinks that is not right and veto just those parts. The other legislative powers are the power to call for a special Congress and a power to adjourn Congress. The power to call a special Congress doesn't really happen because Congress is in session for almost the entire year. But maybe the idea was if Congress was not in session because they live far away from the from the Capitol or something like that, maybe an outdated power, you might say. He also has the power to call for an adjournment of Congress if they cannot decide on the date to end their sessions, which has never happened. They always have been able to come to an agreement when to end their session for the year. The judicial powers are kind of interesting. Not very commonly used, and that's probably because presidents don't want to be seen as interfering with justice. They want to be seen as those who give clemency, which is mercy and kindness, right? But the pardon power of the president is almost unlimited in scope. The fact that he can give almost anybody for any reason and call off any prosecution, and that man can go free. The more famous one is when Gerald Ford gave a pardon to Nixon for the Watergate scandal. Nixon was being accused of being responsible for the break-in that happened with one of his political enemies, where people broke into a political party's office to try and get some information from them. So he pardoned Nixon. It was probably because Nixon was president. It was probably a way to show him some clemency, some kindness. Yeah. And the other things is that amnesty is when you are pardoning an entire group of people, right here, where in 1933, I don't know if you've heard of this, but Mormons had more than one wife, and the president pardoned all of them for doing that because that was breaking a federal law, that was not seen as the scope of marriage. And maybe he did that because he wanted them to be able to practice their own religious beliefs or whatnot. And that's pretty much it. All right. So have a great vacation.